Welcome to this episode of Lessons from the Cockpit Show. I am your host, Mark Hasera. I'm a former KC-135 pilot, instructor at the U.S. Air Force's Weapons School, and was curriculum director at National Defense University's Joint and Combined Warfighter School. My lifelong passion has been airplanes and aviation. Ever since I was a 4-year-old kid standing in my socks on Grandpa Andy's car, I watched Boeing 707s and Douglas DC-8 jetliners pass overhead, landing at Los Angeles International Airport. It was then that I said to myself, why work for a living when I can do this? And for 60 years, I've been around airplanes. Ask any aviator to define flying, and they're probably going to tell you long periods of boredom interrupted by short intermittent periods of extreme terror. On the Lessons from the Cockpit Show, we debrief the most intriguing pilots, maintainers, aircrew members, and aviation enthusiasts from all over the globe. We investigate their tactics, techniques, and procedures they learned and cultivated during those extreme military, commercial, and private flight operations. Our exploration gives practical advice on how the aviation world works and expands critical thinking expertise in the air and on the ground. On a flight out of Honolulu International Airport, we had a problem in our airplane, and I didn't think we were going to live through it. And what was worse, I didn't think they'd ever find our bodies. Many aviators have gotten into bad situations, or worse, have died because they did not listen to that voice inside their heads. The military has a great term for this. It's called gut check. And Malcomb Gladwell has written an entire book about this gut check phenomenon. Recently, I had a discussion with one of my closest friends. Both of our professions, he, an emergency med tech in Houston, and me, obviously a pilot, we share similar attributes in our jobs. One attribute of gut checking causes our brains to kind of slow down in crisis situations. And yet we have total situational awareness of what's going on around us, and we come up with very simple solutions to sometimes very complex problems. As aviators, we really do use our 5 senses when we're flying. These 5 senses truly feed our problem-solving capability and our intuition. On this flight, I masked literally one of my 5 senses, and that sense could have told me right away what was going on inside the airplane and what the real problem was. Hey, it's that time. Grab an adult beverage of your choice. Sit down, strap in, and let's launch the Lessons from the Cockpit Show. I had the whole crew standing at the galley. We opened up the 781, which is the maintenance forms for the KC-135 we were flying, and looked down to see what was written. The day before, we'd had a problem in the airplane. We could not pressurize the airplane. And something very unusual was happening that wasn't covered in any of our books, and we couldn't figure out what it was. So we turned around and came back and landed. We had 26 passengers in the back of the airplane, including a 3-month-old baby. Mom and Dad and all the kids went home to see Grandma for the first time with this brand new baby, and we didn't continue on this ride because we couldn't pressurize the airplane. Written next to our write-up was 3 letters, CND, which means, in military terms, could not duplicate. They had tried to fix the problem with the pressurization system, but they couldn't duplicate what was wrong. And so now I had a real decision to make. I was running through the elements of the decision maker's dilemma: risk, time, quality of knowledge, and outcomes. One of the things that all of us do in our daily lives when we're trying to make decisions, we look at what's the risk, how much time do I have, how much do I know about the problem, and what do I think the outcomes are going to be? Because if you have quality knowledge, you can act with more certainty with a reduction of second and third order effects. You actually reduce risk because you know more about the problem. And we didn't know that much about this problem. We didn't know what was causing the airplane to depressurize when we pushed the throttles up. When we pulled the throttles back, it would repressurize. So I had a real gut check to do. Should we even take off? Well, we've got to go home back to Okinawa. We can't just stay here because it says we couldn't duplicate your problem on the ground. But the other problem is, are we going to take passengers? It is Memorial Weekend, and one of the benefits of being in the military is you can hop on military airplanes like mine, the KC-135, and fly wherever you want to go. My wife and I have done it several times, and it's a great benefit. And the day before, we had 26 people in the back of the airplane, all of them families, military people that had been in the States, and were trying to get back to Okinawa, to their homes, to their where they were assigned. So we all discussed what we were going to do. We all knew we were going to take off. That was a given. But now we had to figure out, are we going to put passengers in the back of this airplane? And all of us agreed we cannot fly passengers if we have another pressurization problem. Because lack of oxygen at 28,000 feet, people will be flopping around on the back. So I dismissed the crew and started our pre-flight inspection, told the navigator, tell command post, we can't take passengers. During our pre-flight, I saw a car pull up outside my window, and whoever was in it slams the gear shift into park. It's the squadron commander of the Air Mobility Squadron there at Hickam Air Force Base. And he is hot. I can see him running up the stairs, and I remember turning to the crew, gird your loins, here comes the squadron commander of the passenger terminal. And he came right into the cockpit and started badgering me. Captain, you have got to take passengers. And I told him, sir, we don't know if this airplane's been fixed. He says, it says they could not duplicate it. They couldn't duplicate your problem. You have to take passengers. I got a passenger terminal full of people that want to go to Japan, and here you are not taking passengers. I need you to take passengers. And I told him, sir, you couldn't duplicate it on the ground, but I bet you I can duplicate it in the air. I am not going to take passengers on this airplane. I don't feel comfortable taking passengers on the airplane. My gut check was telling me, do not put that 3-month-old baby in the back of this airplane again. And he just got more heated. I hate it when you Kadena guys come here. You never take passengers. I'm calling your squadron commander, and I'm going to make you do it. And I said, my squadron commander is Gino Redman. His DSN number is this, and he would love to talk to you. Because I noticed on this lieutenant colonel's shirt, he did not have wings. He was not a flyer. And I told him, sir, I am not taking passengers on the airplane. We need to button up. We need to start engines. We need to get out of here. I hate it when you Kadena guys come here. You never take passengers. I'm calling your leadership when you guys leave, and there will be a message waiting for you when you get home. And I said, okay, fine. So we buttoned up the airplane, started the engines, and taxied out to the Reef runway at Honolulu International Airport. Getting out to the Reef runway, I told Honolulu Tower, we need 2 minutes here just to kind of discuss what's going on. And over the interphone, I said, okay, everybody, we're getting ready to take off. I want all of you to have within arm's reach a source of oxygen. All of you crew chiefs in the back of the airplane, make sure that you've got a personal oxygen kit or POK either on you or within arm's reach. I would prefer to have 2 of them. They don't weigh that much. Co, as soon as you start seeing that needle move backwards in this airplane depressurizing, I need to know it. I need you to tell me. Everybody agreed. We're ready to go. Everybody had oxygen supply with them or on them. And we turned onto the runway and took off. Now, the great thing about a KC-135R model are its engines. They actually tuned the engines from 28,000 pounds of thrust down to 22 to save the life of the engines, but we were lightweight and we leaped down the runway. There is no greater feeling in the world than to feel that speed picking up and you being pushed back into the seat in a big airplane with these massive engines. And all of you have seen these engines. It's the engines that 737s fly with. And I have 4 of them. A 737 only has 2 of them. Into the air we went. Tora 5-4, Honolulu Tower, switch to departure. And my co-pilot said, Tower, Tora 5-4, switch to departure. Next radio call, departure, Tora 5-4 is with you, climbing to 9,000 feet in a right-hand turn heading for Noki on a heading of 285. Tora 54, departure, radar contact. Climb and maintain 9,000 feet. And so off we went. Now we're heading out to the west. And sure enough, passing 9,000 feet, my co-pilot reaches over, taps me on the shoulder, and points. The pressurization needle was going backwards. We could feel it in our ears that the airplane had been pressurizing, but now was beginning to depressurize, and we had the throttles up to climb. I told the co-pilot, till departure, we're going to level off at 12,000 feet. We got to investigate a problem with our pressurization system. Honolulu departure told us to switch to Honolulu Center, which we did, and we told them we need a level at 12,000 feet. We're investigating a problem in the aircraft. This is where I said a prayer, and I say a prayer just like the Savior Jesus Christ does. I address him as Father. Father, what is wrong with this airplane? Why can't we figure out why this airplane won't pressurize? What's the answer to this? Because we had gone through our books yesterday trying to figure out through the alternate pressurization system if we could use that, and even that didn't work. And so we continued climbing to 12,000 feet, and I had one of those gut checks again that said, turn around. Just 2 words, turn around. But I don't know what's wrong with the plane. I have to investigate to find out what is wrong with this airplane. So I told the co-pilot, hey, tell them we need to climb to 16,000 feet. Let's push the throttles up again and see what happens. Tora 54 Honolulu Center, you're clear to 16,000. I reached over, pushed the throttles up, brought the nose up, and sure enough, same thing happened. You could feel it in your ears, the airplane depressurizing. And I can't figure out what's wrong. I told John, my co-pilot, get the books out. Let's look at everything one more time. Let's try it one more time. Leveling off at 16,000 feet, I pulled the throttles back. You could feel the airplane pressurize again in your ears. You fly with your 5 senses. But I did something really stupid. I made my first mistake. I told everybody on intercom, all right, everybody, we have a pressurization problem. Everyone go on oxygen. It was my first mistake. Big mistake. I had masked one of my 5 senses that later would become very, very vital for the problem that we had. During this whole time, we're working the alternate pressurization system. And of course, on an air traffic control center frequency, you hear all kinds of people talking, all right? In the background, heard this British voice, Speedbird 102, Honolulu Center, descend and maintain flight level 250. Honolulu Speedbird 102 out of 32,000 for 25,000. I love hearing the British voice over the radio. And all this radio chatter is going back and forth while we're trying to troubleshoot this problem in the airplane, and we can't figure out what's going on. It's not in any of our books. It's not in any of our experience. We've never had a simulator ride where we've troubleshot pressurization problems like this. Push the throttles up, the airplane depressurizes. Pull the throttles back, and the airplane repressurizes. We're going through the pressurization system schematics. We're going through all of the different parts of it in the book, in the flight manual. We're trying to figure out what's going on. And I just happened to look up, and we were just passing 200 miles west of Honolulu. And I heard footsteps coming up from the back. Somebody was running into the cockpit. And I looked back over my shoulder just in time to see this senior master sergeant who is a crew chief, and he has a look of terror on his face. He is really, really frightened. And with his right hand, he is tapping me on the shoulder. Captain Hasera, I know what's wrong. I know what's wrong. Turn around. Turn around. I know what's wrong. And he ran back to the cargo compartment of the airplane. Leaning to the right in my chair and looking backward, I see 2 crew chiefs with what we call speed wrenches taking bolts out of the floor of the aircraft. We have a plywood floor in the KC-135, and it's just plywood panels. But what really frightened me the most was what the third crew chief was doing. And I knew something was very, very wrong. But I'm going, why on earth is he putting on firefighting gear? We can't pressurize the airplane, and he's putting on the firefighter's mask, and I see him pull a pin out of an extinguisher bottle. And I'm like going, we've got a real problem here. They get a crowbar under that panel, and they pull it up, and a chill went down my spine. And immediately I went into intuitive expertise. All of the training, all of the reading I've done started coming all together. It was like time was slowing down during this emergency, and I knew exactly what I needed to do. Even though it wasn't in any of our books, we'd never studied any of this, I knew what I needed to do. Squawk 7700 and Ident. Crew, descending in a left-hand turn down to 9,000 feet. And I kept looking back, watching what they were doing. That third crew chief had another fire bottle and was pulling the pin. He was spraying it on the bottom of the plywood. And remember, we still have our oxygen masks on. We can't smell anything. And I hear over the radio, Tora 54, Honolulu Center, we see you squawking 7700 emergency. State nature of emergency, number of souls on board, and fuel remaining. That's a standard call that they make. But radio calls do not generate lift. Nav, come sit in the jump seat. Make sure I don't do anything stupid. We're continuing that left-hand turn. Crew, I'm slowing down to 255 knots in the descent. Co-pilot's already put the books away, and he's watching to make sure what I'm doing. Nav, what's a good heading back to Honolulu? And he says, put TACAN channel 101 in and have your nav selectors over to TACAN. All the needles of the compasses swung and pointed straight at Honolulu International Airport. Because remember, aviate, navigate, communicate, but radio calls do not generate lift. Very frustrated, Honolulu Center calls a third time. Tora 54, squawking emergency. This is Honolulu Center. We need to know what the nature of your emergency is, how many souls you have on board, and fuel remaining. I told the co-pilot, I got this radio call, and I squeezed the mic button. Honolulu Center, Tora 54 is fighting a fire in the cargo compartment of the aircraft. Stand by. Continuing in my descent, they were still continuing to fight the fire in the back. Leveling off at 9,000 feet, slowing to 255 knots, I told the co-pilot and the nav, make sure we don't run into anybody. Have your heads out looking around. They can fight the fire in the back. Let's make sure that we're not going to run into anybody. Let's not commit suicide to keep from getting killed by a mid-air collision. And we kept going. Finally, we had a few minutes, and that crew chief came up and said, Captain Hasera, you need to come back and see this right now. Bring your gloves. Why would I need my gloves? Now that you've got the floor all opened up, why do I need my gloves? I couldn't figure it out. And walking back there, he said, put your gloves on and stick your hand down here, and right here. But do not leave it down there. It is extremely hot. And I go, Chief, what's wrong? He goes, just stick your hand down there. Don't leave it down there. I stuck my gloved hand with a fire retardant glove on right where he told me to. And it was like I had stuck my hand into a blazing fire. He said, Captain Hasera, we have a bleed duct failure, but it's failed on both sides of the bleed duct. You know how you've got air conditioning ducting under your floor? It's made out of tin. It's kind of small and kind of boxy and everything running all over your house. Airplanes have the same thing. That's how they pressurize the airplane. That's how they cool the airplane, heat the airplane, whatever it is, just like the air conditioning system in your house. But the problem was we had a hole on both sides of this bleed duct. But that wasn't the real problem, the fire. We were really in trouble. Walking back up to my chair, I got in, strapped in, got back on headset, told my co-pilot, you need to go back and see this. And my navigator went with him. Over the radio, I said, Honolulu Center, Tora 54, We've had a fire in the back of the airplane because we have a bleed duct failure under the floor. 1,300 degree air is blowing on the wood paneling under the floor and started it on fire. That's not the big problem though. There's holes on both sides of the bleed duct, and that hot air is blowing on the elevator cables which make the airplane go up and down. And if that isn't bad enough, Honolulu, that 1,300 degree air is also blowing on the top of the forward body fuel tank that has 16,000 pounds of gas in it. Honolulu Center came back and says, Tora 5-4, how can we help? Honolulu Center, Tora 5-4 needs present position direct to the end of the runways. We need to land as soon as possible. Tora 5-4, Honolulu Center, you're cleared direct to the Honolulu Vortex. Call us when you're ready to descend and land. Then I heard another great radio call. Tora 5-4, this is Speedbird 102. You chaps okay? How I love the Brits. He was just checking in on us. We are part of a brotherhood of pilots. It doesn't matter if you're a private pilot, a commercial pilot, or a military pilot. You are a part of a brotherhood and sisterhood that understands when another airplane has a problem, you are going to try and help. And even though he wasn't going to try and push me or do anything to my airplane, he was just giving me some good moral support. I answered Speedbird 102. We've got the fire out in the back. It's kind of hot back there right now, but I think we're going to make it to the ground. Tora, Speedbird. When you chaps make it on the ground, we're staying at the outrigger at Waikiki. Come join us for drinks tonight. Man, how I love the Brits. They're great allies, and we have spent a lot of time together when I have been flying in the KC-135 with our British allies, and they've been great allies. Well, we finally get closer to the airfield, do all of the things that we can to make it not so hot in the back. But when you've got 1,300 degree air blowing back there, there's not much you can do. We go through all of our checklists, all of the things we need to do. Remember, aviate, navigate, communicate. Aviate, navigate, communicate. All those intuitive expertise things are going through my mind now from hours and hours and hours of procedure trainers and simulator training and flying in the airplane. And we come in and we land. But we're an emergency aircraft, so Honolulu Tower has us pull off at the end of the runway and just stay there. 2 fire trucks meet us because they know that we've had a fire in the back of the plane. And of course, one of the guys has on that silver suit. And the fire chief comes up the ladder and the crew chief takes him to the back and shows him what's wrong. And the man in the silver suit comes up and he's got an extra fire bottle with him. He actually stayed on the plane with us while we taxied back to parking. From the end of the Reef runway back to Hickam Air Base is quite a long taxi, and he was going to make sure that nothing else happened to us. Just to kind of relieve some of the pressure on the bleed duct, I took the outboard throttles, engine 1 and 4, and put them in cutoff and shut them down, and we just taxied with 2 engines all the way back to parking. The fire trucks followed behind us all the way there, just in case something happened. Pulling into our parking spot right in front of the passenger terminal is that lieutenant colonel. And as our cargo door comes up, the nice air stairs that are connected to a truck pull up to us, and we start letting people on board. And that lieutenant colonel comes up. I'm pretty upset at this point, and I'm afraid I'm going to do something unprofessional. But I'm going to certainly go back and talk to him. The crew chiefs and the boom operator had laid the panel up against one of our baggage bins in the back of the airplane, and you could see the black portion burned out of that plywood panel. There was only a couple of inches in each corner that had not been burned black. A matter of fact, about an 8 to 12 inch area in the center of it was only about 2 millimeters thick. And I asked the crew chief, how did you know? How did you know we had this problem? He said, Captain Hasera, I was trying to figure out what we could do. When I was walking by the galley and I saw the paint bubbling on the floor. And a few years ago, I'd had this same exact problem. Paint bubbling on the floor. I knew exactly what was wrong with the airplane. I came up and told you, turn around, turn around. we have a fire underneath the floor of the airplane. Thank heavens I had that crew chief on the airplane, because I don't know what would have happened if we didn't. My co-pilot asked me, why did you have me squawk 7700 in Ident so quickly? 7700 is the emergency radar code that we put in our airplane, and there's a big flash when we ident on the radar screen, and you know exactly the position of the airplane. And I told the co-pilot, remember, aviate, navigate, and communicate. We were communicating with him. But here's the reason why I had you do that. Because if we blew up and crashed into the water, I wanted them to know where to start the recovery effort, where to come find our bodies. That's why I did that. All of these things were coming together at once. I had this gut check feeling we still had a problem, but I still made 2 mistakes. I did everything we were supposed to by the book. Had everybody on oxygen because we might lose pressurization, but I continued away from a landing surface, which was also my second mistake. I should have turned around. My gut was telling me, turn around. Some people would say my prayer got answered. God was telling you, turn around. And often we don't turn around, do we? I need to find out what's wrong with the airplane. We make excuses. These gut checks that we have in our lives, most of the time are correct, but we don't follow them. And I hope all of you from this story, when you have those gut checks and all of your 5 senses are telling you something's wrong here, something's out of place, something's not right, that you'll honor that gut check. Pilots go through hours and hours and hours of studying and simulator rides, scenarios for emergencies, and nothing I'd ever been through covered this emergency. A bleed duct failure under the floor that starts the airplane on fire. Matter of fact, it's the first time I'd ever heard of it. But because of all that training and all of that knowledge, intuitive expertise immediately took over. I made a left-hand descending turn, slowing to 255 knots, because 255 knots, by the book, is the best structural integrity airspeed of the KC-135. That's why I slowed down to 255. In the descent, down to 9,000 feet. The reason I went down to 9,000 feet, below 10,000 feet, you don't have to have your oxygen masks on. It's not required because you can breathe at 9,000 feet in my tanker. So that's when I took the oxygen masks off. But I'd masked one of my senses. As soon as I took that mask off, it smelled like I was flying a wood-burning stove. You could smell the burning and smoldering piece of plywood. And I had masked one of my senses, so I didn't know that. Critical pieces of information, even though I followed the book and it did exactly what I was supposed to, was being denied my brain because I had put the oxygen mask on. And everybody had their oxygen masks on, so none of us could smell it. But that crew chief, with his sense of sight, saw the paint bubbling on the floor and knew exactly what was wrong with us. Thank heavens for that crew chief, but he's bad luck. I'll never fly with him again. He's had that same problem twice. But man, I flew with great crew chiefs. You know, I want you to think about this. Pilots are all college educated in the military. All of us have 4-year degrees. And a lot of these young crew chiefs are high school educated, go off to the different schools to learn how to fix various things on the airplanes. And there's a great saying that you'll hear in all of the military services. It takes a college educated pilot to break the airplane, but a high school educated crew chief to fix it. And no truer words were spoken than on this particular flight out of Honolulu. I had to call my squadron commander and tell him why we were back in Honolulu. I explained to him exactly what happened. I said, Gino, we were on fire under the floor. We had a bleed duct failure. They gave us an airplane that had cracks on both sides of the bleed duct, and they tried to patch them with something. I don't know what it was, and it blew out. And Gino, that great squadron commander that we all still love and appreciate, said to me, good job, Sluggo. You'll do anything for a vacation in Hawaii. You always use humor when you've had some of these death-defying situations in your life. So we're stuck in Honolulu for 4 days, Memorial Weekend. And I had an opportunity to do something that was really fantastic and odd at the same time. My crew had the opportunity to go on the Japanese Navy destroyer Congo that was tied up in Pearl Harbor. Can you imagine that, folks? We hear all these things about 1941, and yet the Japanese are now one of our greatest allies. And my four-man crew got to spend about an hour to an hour and a half on this wonderful Japanese Navy destroyer that is like one of our Arleigh Burke-class destroyers. And it was just a fantastic opportunity to just sit there and think about, isn't this interesting? A Japanese Navy destroyer tied up in Pearl Harbor. On the next episode of Lessons from the Cockpit, a 3M sticky note left on my desk got me involved in probably one of the most complex exercises that the 18th Wing at Kadena has ever had. And I was the warlord for that because of that sticky note on my desk. I was doing things that I had never done before, organizing things that I didn't know anything about, but I got involved, and that exercise became one of the greatest education and exercises in my life. It was so much fun, and we even named it after a great rock band that I've loved ever since I was a kid. I hope you've enjoyed this episode of Squawk 7700 in Ident on the Lessons from the Cockpit show. If you think there's somebody out there that would enjoy hearing aviation stories and the tactics, techniques, and procedures that we use in the air, please refer them and have them subscribe to the Lessons from the Cockpit show. The Lessons from the Cockpit episodes can be found at my website, markasera.com. I'm your host, Mark Asera. Have a great week.